Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for checking out my video. This is questions from comments 49, where I find questions that watchers, listeners have left on the YouTube channel and I answer them here. So we're going to talk about microphones briefly. We have a question about why one's voice gets sore even though they're warming up. We have questions about whether or not to use head voice, all contained here in the video. You can find out the specific questions in the chapter markers along the bottom of the timeline or in my description. And with that, let's get started. After lockdowns and pandemic years, I started using what I had at hand, so condenser mics of a decent quality. Being a tenor, I tend to sound a bit bassless than reality. Lately, I got my old Shure dynamic mic from back home, and yes, the voice is the same, basically, and that's not going to change, but I can feel there's more warmth and more bass even if I don't use the proximity effect. My question is, should singers stick to the mic that they feel makes them sound better, not those that more accurately represent their voices? Or is there a pro standard in mic choices that would be one size fits all? Meaning those that cost an arm and a leg. I know your answer might not endorse brands. Okay, so I'm going to have to pop back and forth to that question in order to answer it because there's quite a lot contained in there. Bottom line, use what you sound best on. I mean, they say here, the person asking the question says, you stick to the mic that makes them sound better, not those that more accurately represent their voices. Well, better here is quite subjective. Better in terms of the way that your voice sounds, or better in terms of the fidelity of the microphone. In other words, if it's not a great sounding microphone and it has loads of artifacts, or it's just not really picking up enough signal to accurately record you, that's a different matter than whether or not it's a microphone that you sound good on, that suits your voice. I use this microphone because it suits my voice pretty well. Are there other microphones that I could choose? Absolutely. Would every microphone that I decided to try work? No, absolutely not. Because microphones are voiced, and consequently they have different pickup patterns, they have different frequencies that they will either embellish or pull back on. So choose the mic that you sound good with. Is there a pro standard in mic choices that would be one size fits all? No, not really. We used to say that the U87 was the mic, and we used to also say that the U47 or the Elam 251 or the U67 or I'm thinking of the M49, but that's kind of more recent actually, or the C12. That's another good historical microphone that has been used for ages and ages and people still rave about. But we've had great albums made on all kinds of different microphones, every one that you can imagine. And now this may be apocryphal, but I've also heard that Bono, the lead singer from U2, sings using an SM58, not even like an SM58 beta. Now it's worth remembering that he might be singing on an SM58, but then that microphone is plugged into who knows the value of the outboard equipment that they're processing all of that through. It's not as if it's going straight from the mic to tape. It has to go through a preamplifier and probably a board of some kind. That's going to include EQ settings, compression as an outboard compressor, maybe a little distressor, maybe a de-esser as well. Like all of that stuff can be put in line, and the SM58 might just be the first stage. Does that matter? Of course it matters, but it's also worth considering what's on the other side of the microphone in addition to just the mic. So basically, yeah, you're right. I'm not endorsing any brands because I'm not endorsed by any brands. I don't have any sponsors. All the different mics that I mentioned, you could try them if you want. A lot of those, like the U47 and the Elam 251, they're going to cost you about 10 grand or more. But there are plenty of microphones out there that you will probably sound absolutely great with. And if you sound great with your SM58, there is no reason to switch. If it is suiting you, keep going. My question is, when I reach the limit of my chest voice, should I switch to head, try to, or go back an octave or two? My chest voice is horrible, but I've been trying to improve it. However, I never know whether I should insist on it or give it up altogether. Anyway, overall, I do feel great improvement ever since beginning with your classes. I can't thank you enough. I'm very glad that the classes are suiting you and helping out. That is, of course, why they are here. I would highly recommend that you work on that transition between head voice and chest voice. And if you are struggling with your chest voice, I would greatly suggest that you just stick to that range for a while. Work on your vowel alignment, work on your apagio breath management, and get that sorted out. It will make the transition into your upper register or head voice vastly easier. It will automatically increase your range because it sounds like you don't like it very much and may not consequently choose to sing in that range very frequently. And it just opens up the palette of things that are available to you for having done that practice. It's kind of odd, in fact, to sort of get to the head voice thing before the chest voice. Usually we do that the other way around. But be that as it may, I would highly recommend you get your chest voice sorted out. It should be fairly easygoing once you get an apagio practice happening and work on the vowel alignment there. Suggestions for vocal cord strengthening exercises. Of course, I don't know the individual that sent this in, and I don't know their individual situation. And so I feel that the best advice I can give to you is kind of broad. And that is, think about vocal fold strengthening instead as vocal fold coordination. The coordination of the closure of the vocal fold mechanism, the coordination of the vocal fold closure at the onset of the flow of air, and think about it more as a balance between the subglottic air pressure and the closure of the vocal mechanism. Strengthening, I think, that term gets used a lot when we talk about wanting to have more power, more presence, more projection, but that is not exactly accurate in my opinion. Yes, if you've never used your cricothyroid dominant singing voice and the posterior and anterior cricothyroid muscles aren't very well developed, then a small amount of strengthening will occur in the practice of learning to use that aspect of your voice. But these muscles are tiny and the structures are very, very small. And it is more important to have good balance between the flow of air and the coordination of these structures than it is to, strictly speaking, try to pump up those structures and make them somehow stronger. It's more about coordination. It is vastly more about balance, and that will generate for you the power, presence, and projection that you may very well be looking for. Great question. Thank you very much for asking that. As I understand it, as we work on our upper register, we are learning to relax our thyroarytenoid muscles and strengthen the cricothyroids to stretch the vocal folds and get higher pitches, as opposed to just tightening the thyroarytenoid TA to get a higher pitch in chest voice. However, once you let the CT, cricothyroid muscles, drop out and relax the TA to go lower, so we're going back down now, it seems there must be a limit to how much you can relax the vocal folds and still get the closure and tension necessary to generate a musical tone. Do most students have an easier, relatively speaking, time strengthening those cricothyroid muscles to expand the range up versus learning to relax and develop the bottom? Or am I missing something? Some time ago, a vocal teacher I met told me he always worked his tenor's low notes, too, because it added depth and richness to the tone. No shrill or tinny tenors. You have kind of all the parts, but I do think that you're missing some connections between things. For example, you mentioned strengthening the cricothyroid muscles, and I just addressed that in a different question. Think about balancing it more. But what you haven't answered for is to what effect? How does getting more balance or using the cricothyroid posterior and anterior muscles affect your voice? If you don't know the answer, well, that's part of the reason why I'm here to tell you. It elongates the vocal fold. So it's not really that those muscles are somehow squeezing the vocal fold or they're doing something to it in that way. What they are doing is they are elongating it. And that elongation, it's like a rubber band when you stretch it out. If you kind of strummed it when it was not as stretched, it would be a lower pitch, and then you would stretch it and strum it, and it would be a higher pitch. And that's what the cricothyroid muscles are doing. They're rotating some cartilage, and it elongates the vocal folds longitudinally, and this gives you those higher tessitura pitches. Do most students have an easier time strengthening those muscles to expand the range versus learning to relax on the bottom? Now, I don't necessarily think I've seen a trend there one way or another. What I would say is that a lot of folks tend to try to push into the bottom. And it is worth keeping in mind that pushing into the bottom is just about as useful as straining for the top. You're creating a lot of excess muscle tension that is going to dampen the pitches that you are singing, and in extreme cases, maybe even keep you from singing those pitches full stop. It isn't so much that we are loosening those muscles to such a degree as we descend lower, but we are, of course, shifting the balance of things. And when the airflow and the vocal fold engagement get so out of balance with one another, then we lose the ability to phonate effectively. So when we're practicing those lower notes, whether you're a tenor or a baritone or a mezzo or an alto or whatever your vocal fach may happen to be, it is, in my opinion, beneficial to begin that practice by thinking of those notes as brighter and smaller, and then working your way up to having an increase in airflow such that the vocal fold engagement is commensurate with it, that you get that nice, rich, full sound that you are perhaps after in the lower part of your range. And while I do not disagree with your previous vocal instructor, I would redirect the thought process on that. It's not that somehow singing those notes is going to richen up your upper register. We don't have a resonant surface like a piano or an acoustic guitar, where a new acoustic guitar doesn't sound as good as it will 10 years down the road, because the glue and the bindings and things like that in the instrument tend to loosen over time, and the resonant surfaces get more flexible. For us, it's about balance. And most of the time, when we don't have good resonance, is because we're getting in our own way. We are tensing up other muscle groups that are unnecessary for phonation. And we are dampening our own frequency response in our systems. Start light and bright as you begin those practices, and in no time at all, I would suggest to you that you will find a lot more color, projection, power, richness, pick your adjective there. Question from comment: a collaborator asked me to sing a song with 0 vibrato. Yes, he capitalized it, LOL. Is that safe for your voice? My voice feels the most healthy when I've got all sorts of different vibratos going on. Thank you so much. You are the best. Well, thank you for that. That is very kind of you. Singing without vibrato. So vibrato is often thought of as an affectation, something we add after the fact. Vibrato, I would suggest to you, in fact, is a healthy sign of a well-balanced system. When you have good vocal fold adduction or closure, and you have adequate subglottic air pressure, the two systems tend to kind of exist in parity, and they sort of push one against, gently nudging back and forth against one another. And this oscillation starts to occur with that interplay. And of course, I'm talking now about vibrato. Vibrato develops out of a well-aligned system with good vowel alignment. If you are going to sing with zero vibrato, you are, by definition, going to attenuate that oscillation. You are going to hold it fast, if you will. That is inherently a higher vocal fold engagement process. You are going to tense up some muscles that you wouldn't normally tense in order to keep the vibrato from appearing. So, is it safe for your voice? In comfortable ranges, if you're not singing too high nor too low, I think it's probably fine. You may feel a bit more fatigue. If you do, take a break. If you find that after a day of tracking that you need a day off, then consider carefully how you schedule your sessions and consider carefully the kind of wear and tear that is taking on your voice. It may take a little bit of time to then recover from it. Just be very, very conscious and careful of it. But in comfortable ranges, shouldn't be too much of an issue. You're going to have to pay very, very close attention, though, to how it feels for you. Hi, Jeff. I have a question about the length of a daily vocal training session. I like to compose my routine by combining several of your exercises. A recent example would be gentle tenor, gentle alto warm-ups, ultimate tenor, ultimate alto warm-ups, one exercise from endurance, or arpeggio, maybe high notes if I have strength, a warm down, and that's it. Sometimes I take an hour, sometimes two. Sometimes it happens that I start coughing right in the middle of all that, and that is where I stop. But mostly I go through it all. How to determine a proper daily training duration? I mostly just rely on how much time I have, and if I feel that I am starting to feel fatigue. Thanks. Well, for one, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I am really grateful if the videos have been serving you so very well that you're using them to that degree. That's, of course, what they're here for. And thank you. I appreciate it. Chopin used to tell his students that if they were practicing for more than 3 hours, that they were wasting their time, that they should spend that time in other pursuits. They should go and, do some music history study or study music theory or something else, not playing their instrument any longer. As far as I know, he never talked about the breakdown of that 3-hour period. For a vocalist, I would suggest this is probably shorter anyway, and I would think that at about an hour or 2 hours of consistent vocal practice, that's a lot of time. Within that time, I don't know that we necessarily need to have more than about half an hour of strict vocalizations. Now, once you move on from that, you may then come back to other vocalizations. However, that would be on an as-needed basis. So let's just say that you're doing half an hour of vocalizations. What would you then do? Move on to repertoire. Because presumably that's what this is about. It is about singing songs. So move on to your repertoire. Having moved on to repertoire, you may find a particular passage that's difficult and that needs a vocalization to work through the vowels or the melody because it has a big skip or something to that effect. I think, much as I appreciate how much you're watching, and it would certainly help my YouTube stuff, much as I appreciate that, I think that is probably more vocalization than is necessary at one go. I would do half an hour, maybe 40 minutes if you're working on registration event stuff, because that can take a little bit of extra time and go a little bit more slowly, and then move on to your repertoire, knowing that if you come across a passage that needs special attention, you may have to then go find a vocalization to practice that passage and then integrate it back into the song. Great question. Thank you for watching. I hope that helps. 2 questions here. For tenors, navigating through and singing in the passaggio easily, at least as perceived, seems important for good singing. However, tenor music also has some often isolated very high notes, A4 or above, usually climactic, dramatic, and generally designed to be thrilling. I think of these as money notes, not always a question of range, I find. With some thoughts on preparation to sing these notes, in such as breathing, arpeggio, managing the musical phrases leading up to and following such notes, be worthwhile. Is this something you and your students have to deal with? And additionally, hey Jeff, love the videos. They help out so much. I was wondering if you had any tips for singing higher than usual and not hurting your voice. These two are related, in my opinion. When you have a passage that has a sort of standout high note, I find it to be very helpful to work on that as a separate thing. So, for example, let's say we're singing a passage and it's kind of sort of doing its thing here, and then it skips way up to the F natural there, an octave higher. You may need to specifically practice that skip. So if the melody, again, right, you have that octave skip. If you are familiar with octave skips, you can probably just work on the vowels from the melody, whatever they might happen to be. If you are not that comfortable or not that familiar with octave skips, you may have to break down the familiarity of that interval. And you may also have to start from the top going down. This is also how you can approach singing higher than you usually do. Work the phrase from the top down. So in our example phrase, instead of doing that over and over again and not being satisfied with it, start there. Practicing that descending octave. When that gets to be very consistent, then reverse it. And then finally, and then you'll have to move on to the next half of the phrase, going to the sixth to the fifth. It's a process. We break these things down to learn one challenge at a time, and then we put it all together. We can try to beat our heads up against the wall of just singing the phrase over and over again, and hopefully you'll get there in the end. But it's quite likely to take a lot more time, and I don't know that you'll get the same quality of results as if you break it down, take it one challenge at a time, and then put it back together. Great questions, both. Thank you very much for that. I warm up every day before performance, and I still wake up the next day with a sore throat. Drinking water, tea, steaming, etc. Steaming, sorry, not streaming. Hasn't fixed it. Any ideas? Yes, don't do the damage in the first place. Whatever you're doing for your warm-up is not being done in a way that is very sustainable. You are straining your voice during your warm-up, and then you're trying to mitigate the damage with water, tea, and steaming. It's not going to work. You have to ask yourself why that's happening. It could be that your vowels aren't aligned. It could be, and before you say, I have good breath work, just hear me out. It could be that your arpeggio breath management is not serving your voice as effectively as it could, or even at all. If you're sticking your belly out and then pulling it back in to breathe, I'm going to suggest to you that that is probably a big part of the problem. A lot of times, vocal fatigue is about imbalance more than it is about the range or what it is that we're singing. If we get the balance of vocal fold engagement and airflow more commensurate to sustainable phonation, then it's more sustainable and we don't have these same problems. Tea and water and steaming are all lovely, and they can also, make you feel just really nice, and they feel good to do that, and that's really great. But the best way to avoid long-term vocal fatigue or repetitive vocal fatigue is to not do the straining in the first place. And that is where I would look. Look at your vowel alignment, look at your phonation, look at your arpeggio breath management. I thought I had another question, but that is it. Thank you so much for your questions. I hope this helps. If you have follow-ups or I have somehow jogged something and you have a question, please drop them in the comments. Until next time, thank you. I nearly forgot. Thank you. This big thank you to all my Patreon supporters. I truly appreciate your support. I wouldn't be able to continue to do this without that support, so thank you very, very much. Truly appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful day. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and hopefully we will see you again. Bye.